If you don't already know, Monolith Soft is the development studio responsible for the Xenoblade series, and they are also known for helping with development on many other first-party Nintendo games. Specifically, they worked on the environment and topography for The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Years before helping with Breath of the Wild, though, they released Xenoblade Chronicles X for the Wii U, and this was not only their first leap into a true open world structure, but also what I believe to be the prototype for Breath of the Wild, specifically in terms of how it handles exploration. Let me explain why. So first of all, I like to describe Xenoblade X as a reverse Breath of the Wild, or rather, Breath of the Wild is a reverse Xenoblade X since it came out afterwards. Without going too deep into the story, Xenoblade X takes place on the planet Mira after humanity had to escape Earth because it was being attacked. One of the colony ships that landed on Mira is called New Los Angeles, and now the goal of the game is to preserve New Los Angeles and explore planet Mira. Now in Breath of the Wild, Hyrule has been hit hard after a major war. Calamity Ganon is the antagonist this time around and has taken over the castle at the center of Hyrule. Your goal here is to preserve Hyrule and defeat Calamity Ganon. So let's tie all this together. The goal of Xenoblade X is to preserve a small area in the middle of the map, New Los Angeles, while infiltrating the larger world around it, planet Mira. And the goal of Breath of the Wild is to infiltrate a smaller area in the middle of the map, this being Hyrule Castle, in order to preserve the larger world around it, Hyrule. Xenoblade X and Breath of the Wild are basically inverses of each other. On top of that, they both allow you to explore these maps fully from the beginning of the game. Xenoblade X was also a prototype for Breath of the Wild in the way that it handled terrain. In Xenoblade X, pretty much every aspect of the environment surface is tangible, meaning you can jump on pretty much anything, even parts that don't seem important like a small bump or indentation on a mountain. This made exploration very freeform and lets you be creative with which routes you take. This also introduced light stealth elements to the game when it comes to avoiding higher level enemies, and light platforming elements when it comes to reaching certain areas on foot. Take this cave in Xenoblade X for example. I was trying to explore it to see if I could find any secrets or anything interesting, and it wasn't until I did some clever platforming where I was able to use the surface in an abstract way to get deeper into this cave. Afterwards, I was able to get a better view of some treasure and later on find out how to get to that treasure. I exited the cave after realizing there was another entrance, entered the cave from the other side, and reached the treasure. Climbing the terrain, quote unquote, from the other side basically helped me get a better perspective of the environment. Similarly, in Breath of the Wild, one of the biggest aspects of the game's exploration is that you can climb almost anything, whether it be a mountain, a tree, or most buildings. The parallel here between Breath of the Wild and Xenoblade X is that Xenoblade X let you, air quotes, climb anything in a more implicit way by making every part of the surface tangible. And Breath of the Wild lets you climb anything in a more explicit way by letting Link magnetize onto any surface. Xenoblade X also has a major emphasis on verticality. The game has several environmental puzzles that ask the player to understand the lay of the land. And once again, a lot of this is done implicitly. There are certain parts of Mira that you can only reach on foot, and vice versa, there are certain parts of Mira that you can only reach while in your mech. And in both instances, there are times where you may get a better view of what those places are. So sometimes while you're in a mech, for example, you may notice a cave that you wouldn't have been able to see on the ground. And sometimes while you're on the ground, you have a better vantage point and a more close-up understanding of an area that is harder to see in the air. For example, the cave that I discussed earlier in the video can only be accessed when you're out of your scale, because your scale is actually too large to fit through the entrance. There's even subtle details in terms of how being on the ground affects NPCs. You aren't able to hear conversations with useful information unless you're on foot because your scale is too big and noisy, for example. This was actually mentioned in the official strategy guide for the game. This is actually why Xenoblade X doesn't give you a mech until later in the game, because it wants to teach you about the relationship between the ground and the air parts of its world. Breath of the Wild, and to a greater extent Tears of the Kingdom, which Monolith Soft also worked on, have a major emphasis on verticality and the relationship between land and air. The paraglider empowers you to explore high areas with a reliable way to return back to the ground. Towers give you a higher vantage point and allow you to get a better view of faraway areas. And Tears of the Kingdom specifically has a sky area of floating islands that are very similar to the floating islands and rock formations found in Xenoblade X that can only be reached in your mech. Granted, this is something I feel the Zelda team had always intended on doing since maybe Skyward Sword, but it's still interesting to note from an exploration and gameplay standpoint.
When you put it like that, you know I can't run away.
Damn right you can't. Now get your butt back to New LA.
Now, Xenoblade X also prototyped Breath of the Wild in a way that was kind of an issue for some people, and it's the fact that this game didn't have huge emphasis on engaging you with the main plot. And I want to be clear before I get into this part, although many people did have a problem with this aspect of the game, I did not. My main reason for bringing this up is just to explain how I think this decision ties into how exploration works in both of these games. So with that said, let's continue. So in Xenoblade X, there is a main central plot, but the main way that you unlock a new chapter of the plot is by exploring a certain percentage of Mira and doing side quests. When asked about how they approached the story, Takahashi said, "The main story might be shorter than Xenoblade Chronicles 1, however, the quest stories are matched up with the open world game design, so there's more depth to the quests." The goal of the game was to encourage exploration of the overall world, and this is why there was an increased emphasis on side quests and letting you explore everywhere from the beginning. In Breath of the Wild, there was also less emphasis on the linear main plot, so much so that you can go straight to the final boss and skip almost all of the game entirely. The genre is different from Zelda, but the reasons are similar to Xenoblade Chronicles X. The freedom to go anywhere in Breath of the Wild means that it is trickier to put emphasis on a linear plot, because players won't all be going on the same path. So the story has to work in a way that emphasizes the fact that everyone is on a different path. Easiest way to do that for both games is non-linear content. Xenoblade X also has a weather system that impacts the gameplay. Depending on the time of day or the region, certain weather effects will give buffs or debuffs to your party, your mech, or even other enemies. During electromagnetic storms, for example, you take damage, and while in your scale you will take slightly more damage due to you being in a mechanical electrical unit. During dense fog, your accuracy goes down. Enemy accuracy will also go down slightly as well sometimes. And also during heat waves, your melee attack strength goes down, but while in your scale, it doesn't affect you. Thank God for air conditioning. So, just like in Xenoblade X, Breath of the Wild also has weather conditions that affect the gameplay. During lightning storms, metal equipment can potentially be struck by lightning. Whenever it rains, it gets harder to climb surfaces, and when it's too cold, Link takes damage if he isn't covered up or around warmth. Different genre, same idea. So with all that said, Xenoblade X and Breath of the Wild / Tears of the Kingdom are sister games in a lot of ways, and I think it's super interesting to look at all the ways that Monolith Soft prototyped this approach to open world game design. What are your thoughts though? Are there any other ways that you feel Xenoblade X and open world Zelda are comparable? Comment if you have thoughts, support if you like, and subscribe to support. It's GK. Peace out.